Arizona should be striving to like, because it's such a new state and they have such great infrastructure and they're on the grid system and they have everything they need to succeed. They just don't put enough funding into education, and the funding that they do put into it, they put towards STEM or test taking specifically. They focus so much on test taking. I don't know if you've like noticed that in Arizona. Like there's so many tests in like every class, and because they want like good test scores, or so like they can put like, oh look, our students got these test scores, and that'll give us more funding and stuff. And if they just focused on the arts or even like athletics or something like that, and put more effort into that, and like making like an actual culture of arts and athleticism, that would not only make the test scores better and the STEM better because they're being more active in the community and it like teaches them skills that they can use in everyday life, but it would also like, they'd be more noticed by like the entire country. Like BOA bands that are like huge get funding because they win competitions and stuff, and like great, you know, high school division athletics and sports, they get more funding because they win competitions and do all this stuff. But a lot of schools in Arizona like will just cut funding for arts. There's one middle school I was teaching at that I don't even want to talk. It was like terrible administration. For some reason, right when COVID came back and they were in person, they changed everything about how the school worked, how the bell system worked, how the administration worked, how the arts was funded, how the like everything. It was just weird. Like everything they changed, and because of that, all of the teachers just left. Like all the old teachers like just gave up and they're like, I'm done with this. One, it's middle school, so it's terrible to teach. Two, they just changed everything. They defunded the arts. So all of their like teachers that have been there and like making like their community and making a culture just gave up and left. Like teachers that have been there for decades, like the band teacher, left, and they had to just randomly hire like some like 20-year-olds to fill the position, and they didn't know what they were doing. And I came in to this internship and they just didn't know like what they were doing, and it wasn't their fault because the administration just didn't give them any help at all. It was just weird to see.
Is that even recoverable at that point?
It was so strange. They did these things, and I've seen this a lot of schools now, where kids can just leave their art classes now, like their required art classes. Like if they're doing bad in like science or English and they need to make up a test, they go, oh, you can leave your band class. Just leave it, and then you'll go work on like your science. It's like they should work on that in their science class, and not like because like you'll have a concert coming up or something like that, and they'll be like, oh, the student, no, they're not going to practice. They're going to go do their test, or they're going to go like.
They use it as a privilege more than an education outlet. It's like, oh, I remember back at Fremont, even if your test scores weren't high enough.
It's like, oh, we're
you can't. Yeah, you can't go to the concert.
Yeah, it's weird because then you can't like. I don't like competing with bands. I think art and music should be more creative and like let the students learn what they want to learn and still teach them these skills that they need to learn in the standards. Because competing at such a young age and it's like such a crazy environment can be detrimental to some kids, and it makes it really competitive and makes them really jaded towards music.
Are you talking about like marching band,
but also like the classical competitions and like competing for like first chair and going to state and all that.
Okay.
And I don't really like any of that, but it's like you kind of need it to prove yourself. A lot of teachers think where it's like we need to compete and we need to do good in competitions to prove that we're like doing something, instead of like having the students make good music that they want to make. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that was interesting. I remember Hamilton was always telling me I should try out for the All-State Jazz Band and whatnot. I forget if you ended up doing that or not.
I tried out for all of them because I was forced to, and some of them I made it, but I just didn't want to do it because the environment was terrible. I don't want to cut you off, but
no, go for it.
I have a story.
I'm interested in this.
A lot of jazz bands, some of them you have to audition for because they're like good gigs, and even like the state, like the Oboda Jazz thing, you go in and usually without fail, like 90% of the time, there's going to be people walking around just like going up to you, and like you'll be practicing Mind Your Own Business, and they'll be like, hey, by the way, buddy, you're shit. You should just quit. You sound terrible. And they just like leave.
Who are these people? These peers or these administration?
Just random people auditioning as well. Because they...
Oh, at the auditions.
Yeah, they want to put other people down so that
It's like a mind game.
Yeah, it's a mind game to them. And sometimes like you'll meet friends and you'll like jam with them, and like you'll actually meet friends, and like those people are going to be the people that are like successful in their lives, and you'll like get gigs with them.
Yeah, they have this monopoly on talent almost. It's like the university's monopoly on social interactions.
Yeah, it's like the people that go around just being like, oh, you're terrible, buddy, give up. Those people might be successful in the short run. Like maybe they'll get the gig, but their reputation is like ruined, and everyone like knows them as like that mean guy, and they don't want to work with that person anymore. Even if they're a better player, they'll hire someone that's like nicer or gels with the group better. And you see that all the time. But there was one audition I was at. It's happened a few times actually, where it's like some kid's first audition, or like some teen, they're auditioning for a group at the Nash or some random like college group, and same thing as always. Like someone goes up and be like, "Hey, you sound terrible. Give up." And then they've never heard that before, and so they start like crying. And then I have to go over and be like, "Hey, buddy, it's all right. Why don't you like jam with me for a bit, make you feel better?" But then at that point, if they take it like that, it's already too late, and like their mental game is gone.
Dude, I remember was it Allstate or was it Regional? One of those. They're the same thing pretty much. The waiting area was just this big auditorium, and it's just, dude, it's like anarchy in there. You know what I mean? There's like these clique groups, and there's these kids sitting by themselves, just stressing out of their minds, like their papers all crinkled up.
Yeah, auditions are the worst, especially for younger kids. Like you get used to it the more you do it, but it shouldn't. I also hate the way it was set up for a BOTA and all that stuff. Not really to get into it, but it felt so biased. A lot of the schools you went to, there was one year, I never really auditioned or competed, but sometimes I kept up with the drama because it was just fun, and I love gossip. There's one year it was held at like this one school, and all the judges were like from that school. It was supposed to be completely biased, and like there's supposed to be a screen in front of them.
Supposed to be unbiased.
It's supposed to be, completely unbiased. But it ended up being, I think, 95% from that school. Because like either I don't know if they had like a tell, like they would like tell them.
No, I know what you're talking about. It was a certain warm up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like they played it a certain way. They go, oh, that's my kid. And they put him in.
Dude, for percussion, there isn't a screen because they need to see you.
Yeah, it sucks. And then there's also so much, it's gotten better in the past like decade or so, but there's in the past so much like sexism towards auditioning.
Sexism, really?
Oh, huge amount. Especially in ensembles, like symphony ensembles or symphony orchestras. You're auditioning for like a philharmonic or something. And if there's not a screen there, and you're auditioning like as a female, and the judges are like just like random old white dudes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Then they're definitely gonna, even if you play better, they're just gonna view you as like less like, oh, it's a girl playing trumpet. Oh, girls should play flute. They don't play trumpet or something like that. And it's like,
I remember that Lexa had an issue with that.
It's been the worst, yeah.
Because she played trombone in jazz band, and she always had people coming up to her and was like, "That's cool, you play trombone," or that's weird, you play trombone. Yeah.
It's weird how people associate genders with instruments when there is none.
Yeah, that is a weird thing. Like, there's some instruments where it's both. You know, you have piano, you have some of the greatest female players, and then some of the greatest male players. They're both kind of in that same threshold. I feel like maybe flutes specifically, there's a big issue, and then low brass, there's a big issue.
It's weird because flute, historically, way back when, like in the Baroque era, flute was seen as a male instrument.
Well, I feel like everything was male.
Yeah, back then. Because it was like it was seen as like a male job. But like each culture views it differently. Like you go to a different country and they're like, oh, musicians is a female job. And you go to a different country like, oh, musicians is a male job. But then some cultures just view it genderless. So it's like really strange that all these countries and cultures create the same instruments. Like they all create a single, like something to hit with a stick, and like they create like a single reeded instrument, like a clarinet, and they create like a horn or something, but they all view it differently within their own like culture.
You know, a small anecdote about film here. So with the editing, it used to be a female's job because it was very similar to sewing. Right. And so a lot of these really old movies, Gone with the Wind, like not Gone with the Wind, like pre-Gone with the Wind,
Casablanca,
anything that was a silent film was most likely done by a woman. And so these great editing, look at the way they cut this film, that's woman. And you never hear about that.
Because they don't get credited.
Yeah, but also once they started putting sound in films, it became a man's job because it was like electrical or something.
Weird.
And so women completely got kicked out of that job market. But a lot of the greatest editors and storytellers were still women.
Yeah.
And so like Hollywood tanked for a second there.
Weird.
Because they lost all this human capital.
There was kind of going off that. There's a great teacher I had, Jarrett Waters, and a great friend, plays saxophone. At a competition, there's a really famous, one of the most famous concertos for saxophone is Glazunof's saxophone concerto. And maybe I'll play some later just to show you what it sounds like. But it is basically the story of the concerto is you are the man playing the instrument and the instrument is the female. And
that's a little sus.
It is. And it's kind of like an old concerto. It's like of its time, you can argue. But my friend Jarrett did it, and he kind of like tried to role reverse it and change it and like question like why is it written this way. So at a competition that he won, by the way, like a world competition, he did Glazunov in heels, and he played it like super beautifully, and he did it like super gender fluid and just kind of like played the concerto how he thought it should be played instead of like this story that was written by the composer. That's kind of like a problem with a lot of music in classical especially, is people think that I should interpret exactly what the composer
one interpretation.
It's like the composer written this way, the composer wrote it this way, so I play it this way. It's like I hate that so much because I come from a jazz background where it's kind of like I play it the way I think it should be played or like my interpretation of it. And then I do that a lot. And when you play for like super classical people, they're like, that's wrong. Why'd you put vibrato there? Why'd you crescendo there? There's no crescendo written. And I was like, I thought it sounded good. I don't know. And then I always have to justify myself with these decisions I make, which in my mind are just musical decisions. And it's like my own preference. And it feels like a battle sometimes when I'm like playing for these professors or teachers. And they're like, why did you do this way? There's not an accent written there. And I was like, well, it comes from this phrase and it comes from this phrase, and I use the context here and I use the story that I was being told to like try to put like this here, put more emphasis on this. And they're like, that makes sense, but it's not written. I was like, well, it doesn't matter. And sometimes it's been such an argument that I've had to like email the composer, like if composers are alive, which is great if they're alive because you can email them and be like, hey, is it okay if I do this? And they go, I don't care. You ask the composers and they're always like, do it whatever you want. I don't care.
Yeah, like it's out of my hands.
And then you'll show that to the performers, and they go, well, or
show that like to the judges or whatever.
Yeah. Or there's another huge thing where there's these like standardizations of performances, of pieces.
Yes. In
where
jazz,
it's like
specifically,
you have to play it like this guy played it because he played it the best, and you want to imitate him because he's the best. And it's like, why can't I just play it my own way?
Lang Lang's Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto 1 is the only one you can.
Yeah. You can only do Marcel Mule's version of this piece. Oh, it's like, man. I don't know.
Or like the penultimate recordings by specific artists, like only this version of So What by Miles Davis is, because he does it this way. Like this solo is the solo you want.
I love doing transcriptions because I love listening to jazz music, and you have to, even if you're in the classical saxophone studio, they're like, listen, buddy, you're a saxophonist, you're playing jazz, do a transcription. They're like, you're playing a jazz instrument, buddy, listen. So even if you're in the classical studio, not the jazz studio, they make you do jazz stuff all the time. And the idea with transcriptions is you want to sound exactly like them and do it exactly like they did. But sometimes and I get that. And
is that what they say?
Yeah.
Because I've been told by a lot of people that the transcription, it's you're learning the language.
Yeah,
more than anything.
You're learning the motifs and like the form of the solo, and you're trying to memorize it and like so you can use
it's more like
tools.
putting theory in context.
That's how it should be. But it's supposed to be like you're learning these tools and these methods that they use and like learning how they form a solo and the phrases and the melodies they interweave and the motifs. But a lot of times when they'll give it as an assignment, they'll be like, you have to sound exactly like he did. And they'll judge you on like a scale of like 0 to 100, how exact you sound. Like the articulation is exact and this is exact. And it's a good exercise, but I don't think it should be when you do a transcription, you should do it exactly like they did.